Let's talk about Hollywood prisons and prisoners, the epitome of hypermasculinity. Much of my lecture today will come from the article by Bill Yousman called Challenging the Media Incarceration Complex with Media Education, along with an article by Travis Dixon and my master's thesis called The Spectacle of Punishment, which you can find just with a Google search. The quote at the bottom of the screen is from Guy Debord's 1967 book called Society of the Spectacle, which provides the groundwork for Yousman's piece, which in turn provides the groundwork for my thesis. I flashed on the screen here briefly the citations that I just mentioned. A Google search of prison reveals some telling themes. The top results are often of sweaty, shirtless men scowling in the prison yard or in their cells, some even in the process of breaking out. Watch any of these films and you'll notice some obvious themes. Some of these characters are well known in pop culture, with portrayals of women's prisons. As we saw last week with Orange is the New Black, gender norms are different. They allow for a softer character presentation. Women are not expected to fight the first person they see when they enter a Hollywood prison yard. These are stereotypes that play well with cultural norms of masculinity, and producers lean all the way in. Women are not fearful of dropping the soap and getting raped in the shower. These are tired tropes are the product of Hollywood's perfection of the male outlaw. There are numerous examples of Hollywood playing with this trope, sometimes comedically, as in the right here with Half-Baked, other times dramatically, as in The Shawshank Redemption. The danger of sexual assault, though, is par for the course in Hollywood representations of men's prison. So here I want to talk a little about the recipe for a Hollywood prison film, a subject which was touched on but not really unpacked in the article by Yousman. So if you want a citation for what I'm about to talk about here, see my thesis called The Spectacle of Punishment, available online with a Google search. All Hollywood prison films, from Victor Hugo's Les Miserables to Cool Hand Luke in 1967 to newer shows like Oz, Prison Break, and Shawshank Redemption, rely on the exact same recipe. Any apparent differences are the result of how the ingredients are combined, and we'll see that as we work through this. Let's start with the ingredient list, a short one. We need an outlaw and a lawman, along with a host of other characters whose stories revolve around them. They need to be pitted against each other. That's basically it. You can pick any reason you like. They can be on a personal feud, or they can just have a random connection that develops early in the story. It doesn't really matter so long as the outlaw and the lawman are mortal enemies, and we'll see that time and again in representations. More importantly for our discussion, and this is where it gets tricky, you have three choices in a prison movie for how to present the prison itself, as either a paradise, as a paradox, or as some sort of penance that is being meted out, a punishment for something that somebody has done. These tropes will often operate together. Occasionally they'll work separately, but usually you'll see them all together in one film. So when you think of prison as paradise, think of the idea of inmates with tennis courts and the pool and the spa. Also think of the trope of sexual predators being free to roam the prison and do as they please. When you think of prison as a paradox, you can think of how television and movies present prison as confusing, as having rules that are hard to understand, as being sort of necessarily impossible to fix and to understand. And you can think of the revolving door as just one example. Almost 80% of people go back to prison within 5 years of release, and yet we sort of just come to take this as business as usual. And prison as penance is evidenced in stories where the bad guy comes to terms with his immorality and has a change of heart, and the prison is shown to sort of fix him. And you can think of Red at the end of The Shawshank Redemption as one example of this. So let's look at a few examples in real time from movies that have been big in Hollywood. In this scene from DC film Suicide Squad, we see prison as a paradise, complete with cappuccino machines and personalized cells, nice books, music, designed to accommodate each inmate's individual needs. Widescreen TVs, everybody's got their own individual unit, even the people that are acting out against the system. In addition, per Yousman, prisoners, in this case the Joker and Harley Quinn, are depicted as so dangerous and so villainous that even the most secure prison with armies of armed guards could not contain them. In fact, it's no wonder that viewers come to imagine prison as a place where terrible monsters are barely prevented from wreaking havoc on the rest of us. They have scenes like this to turn to when they really don't know how to make sense any other way. Another example, in Stephen King's The Shawshank Redemption, producers show a great example of prison as penance, as a straight-up institution of punishment.
Both. Put your trust in the Lord. Your ass belongs to me. Welcome to Shawshank.
The first night's the toughest, no doubt about it. They march you in naked as the day you were born. Skin burning and half blind from that delousing shit they throw on you. And when they put you in that cell, when those bars slam home, that's when you know it's for real. Old life blown away in the blink of an eye. Nothing left but all the time in the world to think about it.
Prison is a place that you don't want to wind up in these stories. A place where nasty criminals are punished for the terrible things they've done. As with most Hollywood representations of prison, Shawshank uses all the tropes throughout the film. In multiple scenes, the main character is sexually assaulted by a group of inmates who call themselves the Sisters. For these predatory inmates, prison is a paradise. A place where they can perpetrate gang rape without the typical penalties. Later in the film, the main character is revealed to be innocent, but the warden has the only person who can clear his name murdered. With a dirty warden who is stealing money and murdering inmates to protect himself, Shawshank is also a great example as prison as a paradox, as a confusing jumble of good guys and bad guys seemingly on both sides of the bars. The reason producers continue to feed us this violence, and now we're getting back to Yousman's point, mayhem and murder on TV, is because we continue to order it. It's what we want. It's the thing that we will stay tuned into. For decades, the trend has been towards more extreme and more violent portrayals. You can compare the top shows of 1986 and get an idea of just how severe this trend is. As a country, the United States now prefers titillating accounts of violence and criminality to family programming more common 30 years ago. Considering the rate of violence has decreased as the rate of violence on television has increased throughout the last 30 years, Yousman thinks that we ought to think of our televisions and films as funhouse mirrors rather than as windows into reality. We might see glimpses of what is going on out there in the world, but those images are always distorted and they're always skewed. Much like the funhouse mirror, the reason for this is simple. We stay tuned in when we stay entertained. And as always, the purpose of television is to get you to watch more television, otherwise it doesn't exist. As the mirror bends and stretches the truth into the stuff of imagination, we remain captivated, staring in awe at the bizarre reflection and taking it as reality. It brings to mind Desserteau's work regarding referential reality. The stories we consume become the basic building blocks of our truth, the mental stuff with which we make sense of our world as it unfolds. Yousman breaks down the natural consequences of our cultural lust for murder and mayhem on TV, and his explanation should ring surreal given recent worldwide events. He begins with a scenario. Imagine a culture becoming convinced of just three things. Number one, something bad might happen. Number two, little can be done to prevent it. And number three, it might happen at any time. Now, whether the threat is real or not, fear and anxiety will drive people to act. The only response? Wait, prepare, and look for an answer. Any answer, even if it's illogical. And we can see this with the recent COVID-19 outbreak, where people are hoarding toilet paper, paper towels, and face masks, items which most of them know full well are worthless when it comes to protecting them from a respiratory virus that is beyond containment. Travis Dixon's research discovered similar trends in both local and national news broadcasts. From LA to New York, news programs can be examined alongside recent trends in crime and law enforcement. Now we can compare how many people were arrested for shoplifting to how many people were shown on the local news arrested for shoplifting, or for murder, or for any other crime. Dixon took those local numbers and compared them to how often people of color were the subject of local and national TV news crime reports, and he found a few very interesting things. Both local and national news outlets are more likely to report on crimes committed by people of color than by white people, and this goes across the country regardless of the racial makeup of the area and the crime committed. When police are shown, they are disproportionately white men that are shown in uniform. Even if a community has more men of color, you will see more white men shown in uniform. White victims are more likely to be reported on, especially if their crime was committed by a person of color. And again, this goes not only locally across the country in Dixon's research, but nationally as well. And people of color who are victims of crime are seldom the subject of news stories compared to the rates of white folks who are victims of crimes. But the point as it relates to Yousman is that we take away from these stories an image of reality, a referential reality, to again borrow Desserteau's words, and that is what informs our identities and our daily life experience. The same stereotypes perpetuated by Hollywood are reinforced by our supposedly unbiased news networks.